Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. If someone in your life has BPD, you know how difficult it can be, and you need to learn how to heal from those toxic relationships. And that's where this show comes in. Expert education, expert knowledge, expert insight, and delivered with compassion and empathy. With your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. To purchase and book sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. Now your host, AJ Mahari.
A couple things before we start this episode. I have a website for this podcast, and it's at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. Interactive website. It's a website is its own feed for the podcast and also for my YouTube channel. So if you'd like to get a lot of the videos that aren't in this podcast, you'd like to check those out, you can do that at survivingbpdrelationshipbreakup.com. I would just like to encourage you to please leave a 5-star rating for this podcast if you find it helpful, to help this podcast keep growing and keep reaching more and more people who could benefit from this content. I get a lot of people with BPD rating it at 1 star because, they have all these problems with what I'm saying, and they think it's horrible and disgusting and all that kind of BPD kind of stuff. Now, let's dive into today's episode. I'm going to be talking about the borderline's mirror image of, quote, other, unquote, and how it's about their own internal wounding, and it's not about you at all. Borderlines trying to relate to any, quote, object other, unquote, so any other person, in most relationship roles. Perhaps not all for every person with BPD. Some might be able to have a few friends. Some might not be able to. Make work, some can't. But certainly in significant relationships and closer relationships and significant other relationships, favorite person, family members, etc., people trying to relate to anyone else who becomes, quote, object other, unquote, at some point sooner or later are going to split you to a devaluation that is major enough that you will become, as I talked about recently in the podcast and on the YouTube channel, the persecutory object. And I'm going to talk about this a bit further to talk about how once you become the, quote, bad object other representation, usually a parent, bad parent, and you're devalued that way, this split casts you forever as the borderline's persecutory object. And I didn't make that clear when I last spoke about this, that once you are seen as, quote, bad object, unquote, you're not really ever going to be seen as anything but the bad object and the persecutory object of the person with BPD. And when I say seen, I mean experienced that way. They're going to associate you with all negativity, more fear of abandonment, more fear of engulfment, more of their triggered emotional dysregulation, but not that they consciously know this. Many, many people with BPD don't know this at all. They cannot change you as, quote, bad object, unquote, or, because it's synonymous, the persecutory object. They cannot change that experience of you after a major split to devaluation, no matter what seems to be coming back, no matter if you're recycling a relationship and they're seeming like they're back in the sweet cycle. It's not really what it seems like it is. And it will only last, maybe like hardly at all or a little bit, and then they're going to put you right back into the bad object, persecutory object, because you never really get out of that. And you can't get out of that in terms of the person with BPD's broken mirror, if you will, because you will always be reflecting persecutory bad object unless and until they do long-term psychodynamic successful therapy, looking at something like 10 to 16 years there. And it's not really something that most people with BPD are going to undertake, unfortunately. And also that it's not wise to think that you can somehow carry on a relationship while they try to do all of this work. And I've been speaking to clients even recently, but over time, who do try to do that, and their relationships continue to just re-rupture. People are suffering more and more abuse, even when the borderline is in, quote, therapy, unquote, because a lot of people who are with somebody with BPD, you're already the persecutory object, and you can't really know what they're doing in therapy, or if they're really getting anywhere or not. And often people with BPD, sadly, will not tell the truth to the therapist, triangulate a partner and a therapist, whether you go to sessions together or not, which I don't recommend. And they also will just not be telling the therapist the truth. They will weaponize some of what they're learning against you. So, risky to try to want to hang in, because you think this person with BPD is going to do this work and you can stay together while they do it. Or you can wait around for 10 or 15 years and see if it happens or not. Not a good idea. So you need to stop trying to make the impossible work, because it won't work and it can't work. So you need to stop trying to pretend what hurts doesn't hurt, or minimize how much it hurts, and stop trying to justify any reason for false hope or getting your BPDX back, or recycling a relationship as if in your fantasy bond it can ever be made, quote, healthy, unquote. In this podcast episode, what I'm talking about, people don't want to hear it, right? But you need to hear it, I believe, based on 35 years work with clients. And what I'm talking about here is something that can be incredibly hard to hear, hard to understand and process, and even more difficult to accept. And that's the toughest part of this. For people with codependency or counterdependency, but for people who are still trauma bonded and fantasy bonded with somebody with BPD. It's the moment when someone with borderline personality disorder puts you into what's called the persecutory object role that I'm specifically talking more about here. And the podcast episode, so if you're listening to this in the podcast, that episode was called Borderline Persecutory Object, Invisible Partners, and Exes. And if you're listening on YouTube, you'll see that podcast quote video, not really video, listed under this on YouTube. So again, that podcast episode was called Borderline Persecutory Object, Invisible Partners, and Exes. So the fact that you become persecutory object, which isn't something that most people with BPD know consciously or anything, but it is how they're going to respond, react, defend, protect. And it's another case of the repetition compulsion cycles of how they will rupture relating in a very unconscious way, more often than not even. So once you're in the persecutory role, this isn't just a temporary misunderstanding or a bad day or some kind of just mood on the part of the person with BPD. And it's nothing that you did that triggered them to this. Remember, their triggers are internal. And it's their perceptions, misperceptions, and their defense mechanisms that get them to perceiving you as the persecutory object, bad object other, usually like bad parent. It's a deep shift in how they perceive you. And for many, and really I would add most, it's permanent. Whether you try to explain, reconnect, or recycle the relationship, the dynamic rarely truly resets. In fact, it doesn't really reset or change unless and until they've gone to, a good 10 to 15 to 16 years worth of psychodynamic therapy, not just DBT. So today I'm going to explore a little bit more about why is that permanent from both a psychological and emotional perspective. So you can stop chasing the impossible and start protecting yourself emotionally, psychologically, maybe even financially, and protecting your heart. So part 1, what is the persecutory object? Well, in object relations theory, the foundation of understanding BPD relational patterns, every person we encounter is stored in our mind as a, quote, internal object, unquote. I would refer to that sort of loosely as like a reflection of who you are or who the next person is as you perceive them internally, as they become somewhat of an internal object to you, as this only works when the borderline splits to bad object, really. And even then, it's still just not the same as when other people store in their minds an internal object of someone that you care about and or you love. These are mental and emotional representations of people that carry emotional tone: safe, unsafe, loving, rejecting. In healthy emotional development, we integrate both the good and the bad of any given person into one whole image. At least that's the goal. That's when people are healthier. And let me just say, the whole image or whole object relations isn't necessarily something that everybody has, isn't necessarily something that every codependent has, but you can be not so far away from it. And certainly, if you're experiencing a bit of a lack of whole object relations, it's definitely not like what people with BPD are experiencing. Because in BPD, the early trauma and arrested emotional growth, the arrested emotional development, these images are split into all good or all bad. So the good object is idealized, perfect, savior-like. And once you get devalued from being that good object, you don't get re-idealized or re-valued again. It might seem like it, but it's not really happening. And the all bad split of people with BPD is persecutory object, dangerous, rejecting, shameful, hurtful. Person with BPD, if they have any awareness of this, might just think, now you're awful, you did a whole bunch of stuff to them that you didn't do, and they just associate you with everything negative, painful, and, quote, triggering, unquote. But again, not necessarily consciously. When you're cast as a persecutor, you're not being seen as the complex, multidimensional person that you are. You're not being seen for who you really are. That means you're not being experienced, you're not really being known, you're not being trusted, you're not being valued, etc. You've been reduced by a person with BPD to an emotional symbol of all the hurt, betrayal, and danger and emotional dysregulation and internal emotional terror that they've ever felt. Part 2. Why this role feels permanent. I want to be clear. This permanence isn't because they can't cognitively forgive or, maybe emotionally forgive something or never speak to you again. It's because once that internal switch flips in people with BPD, it's just not about you anymore. It's about them, their internal world, and their emotional survival. Here's why the bad object, persecutory object role that, people with BPD protectively cast you into in what is you're trapped in a broken mirror image. The person with BPD cannot see beyond a broken reflection that eliminates you and puts in place bad object wounding parent, and then your experience that way. So here's where the role sticks. Number 1, you're locked in the split. They can't hold both your good and bad qualities in mind at the same time. Once you're bad, you stay bad. 2, emotional memory freezing. The moment of hurt gets stored as the entire truth of who you are inside the borderline, in the borderline fragmented, lack of self, and you become lost in their mirror, reflecting only back to them the persecutory object of wounding parent. And it's really not about you. Even years later, that's the version they recall. This is why, as many of you know, that people with BPD tend to say about every ex, oh, they were horrible, they did this and that to me. And often what they're describing, people with BPD might have had like a narcissistic ex or something like that versus a codependent ex, and they may have been hurt, sometimes. But they're always going to vilify as persecutory object each ex, and it stays permanent. And the other thing too is like favorite person, friend, parent, whomever, in any relationship type, once a person is lost in the mirror of the borderline fragmented split, though, to the devaluation of persecutory object, That has permanence, unlike anything else in people with BPD. And the third is projection cementing. Parts of themselves they cannot accept, like anger, shame, or selfishness, many other sort of fragmented parts of self and negative and difficult emotions, get projected onto you and stuck there. And 4, the fact that people with BPD have no object constancy. They can't keep a steady emotional picture of you when you're not present. So the lost emotional impression dominates the whole relationship history, as does any split to devaluation, because then who they thought you were, who they idealized, they don't go back there. Even when it seems like maybe they are headed that way in a Hoover, maybe they're headed that way in a relationship recycle, or continued communication, or you're trying to be friends. But it really isn't stable, and it really isn't what you think it is or what they think it is, because in a heartbeat at some point or other, sooner or later, they're going to split again, devalue you again, and the persecutory bad object that you are now trapped in the borderlines broken mirror reflection to anyone, it's internally going to remain permanent inside of them, unless and until they get so many years of therapy and do a whole ton of work that a lot of people with BPD are never going to do, sadly. Part 3, why communication or recycling doesn't change it. This is where so many people, especially codependents, get stuck. You might think, if I can just explain it right, if I can just show them how much I care, if I can just apologize better, if I can try harder, if I can just not say this, if I can just not say that, well, now I know this, so I'll try not to do that. There's any solution to this, because there isn't. But what you don't realize often, or maybe not yet realize, or you can't yet accept, is your efforts are speaking to a wound, not an actual self in the person you're trying to relate to. They're not who you want them to be. They're not who you thought they were. You are literally speaking to a wound and a fragmented person who has no self, and they don't have any trust. They are not recalling the relationship's good times in the same way that you are. Stress, fear, or emotional flashbacks will snap them right back into the persecutory lens, no matter what was said last week. Or if you had a phone call and they were kind of sweet for a half an hour or 3 hours. Or if you've been trying to talk here and there and they get a little bit sweet. It's not the fullness of idealization. It's not the fullness of, the sweet cycle is really then only a really quick cycling thing. And it will be back to mean your persecutory object and devaluation. It's like trying to paint over deep graffiti on a wall. The color might look new for a moment, but the markings bleed through again as soon as the emotional weather changes. Even if the relationship, quote, resets, unquote, for a while, little bit, or a while, the reset is fragile. Under stress, the old role is instantly reactivated. That means you're bad object, you're still persecutory object. Part 4. The emotional toll of all of this on you. When you're unseen, lost in the mirror of BPD fragmentation, splitting, protection, defense, and survival at all cost, which takes over and is the primary driver of people with BPD. It's not connection, it's not attachment, it's not love. It's survival and protection. And in that light and regard, everybody is the enemy. The emotional toll on you. When you've been put in this role, your self-worth is often dragged into question. And you're losing yourself already. And you may be confused. You could well be traumatized. You are often hurting and in pain. It's a very difficult place to be. You may start to over-apologize for things that you didn't even do. Feel like you're constantly on trial. doubt your own memory of events, believe that if you try harder, the relationship can go back to the, quote, good object stage. And it can't, and it won't. This is how many codependents get trapped in recycling, not realizing that you are engaging with an emotional template, not an accurate view of the person with BPD. You cannot extricate yourself from the broken mirror of BPD fragmentation. They don't see you. They don't know you. They're not really hearing you. You are unseen. They don't experience the real you for who you really are. And part 5, a compassionate truth. Here's the part, well, among other things, that's really hard to accept. But when you work to accept that in a process, and I work with clients, and I have 35 years experience doing this work with clients, that if if I resonate with you, I'm out here to work with you. What's really hard to accept, but can be deeply freeing, once you're locked into the persecutory role, it is not your job, not your responsibility, nor is it even possible to work your way back into the good or idealized role. That role is not earned. It's assigned. And in untreated BPD or not significantly super well-treated BPD, it shifts according to their emotional state, not your behavior. This isn't to demonize people with BPD. This is to help you see that you cannot love, explain, or prove your way out of a position that exists inside someone else's unresolved trauma. That being that you're bad object and persecutory object, and not seen for who you are. That's really hard to accept, but when you can accept that, when you can take that in, when you process that, as I work with clients and in therapy, you can begin to learn more and make more emotional accommodation shifts and cope better to be able to actually work that through. Part 6, a few metaphors here to help you remember. Sometimes, people need a visual or maybe a metaphor to remember a really hard truth that you don't even really want to be true. So when you are the persecutory object, no matter if they get into a little bit of a sweet thing, until again, split to devaluation, mean cycle, and you're back to persecutory object, because you're still really persecutory object when they get a little sweet again. And you're starting, and you trust that, and you want them back. This is problematic. And you could be re-traumatizing yourself and continue to abandon yourself. So the first metaphor is, being a persecutory object is like being frozen, a frozen casting call. Once you've been cast as the villain in their movie, your lines and costume just can't change, no matter what you do. And the second metaphor is like it's an emotional mugshot they take of you in their minds internally. No matter how much good you do, the same mugshot appears in their mind over and over and over, because it's now a deep internal, you are now a deep internal object of the representation of persecutory object, bad wounding parent. And the third metaphor, it's like Velcro projection on the part of people with BPD. Their fear and anger stick to you like Velcro. You can't pull it off for them. And you can't cover it up because it's internally stored inside of them, and often unconsciously. So in closing, if you've been put in this role, and most people really get into the persecutory bad object role with somebody with BPD, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the monster their mind makes you out to be. It is not about you. It is not your responsibility. It is nothing that you caused. You are not obligated to keep standing in the firing line of a person with BPD's projections to prove your worth. You probably have diminished self-worth right now, if you've been in one of these relationships, traumatized, the on-off cycles, discarded, but devalued, split, put in this bad object role. But the thing is, not only are you not obligated to stand in the firing line of someone's projections to prove your worth, you've been self-abandoning and losing yourself. So even if you had some self-worth in your codependency, you may be feeling like you don't have any right now. But that's just because you're being so hurt, and you, in the fantasy bond of it all, are accepting the fantasy bond part of the trauma bond. You are accepting, whether you're aware of it or not, or you have been accepting, that abuse can interweave with love. And it can't, because wherever abuse is present, there is no healthy love. The most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and for the person with BPD is step back and refuse to play a part in a script that was written long before you ever entered the picture. So may you be given the wisdom to see the difference between what is truly yours to heal and what belongs to the person, to people with BPD, and their needed journey through many years of intense therapy. May your heart find peace in knowing your worth, or working to find out more about your worth. Reclaim your worth in an internal way that does not seek to have your worth validated by a borderline, but validated by anyone else at all. And that your worth is not defined by someone else's perception. The borderline's mirror image of, quote, other, unquote, of you, please hear this, has absolutely nothing to do with you. And I know that this isn't what people want to hear, but it is really what you're going to need to hear, what you're going to need to know, what you're going to need to seek therapy about. And if I resonate with you, I'm out here to work with you. But you're going to have to, at some point, something has to give, because you're losing yourself. You're being traumatized. And love isn't supposed to hurt like this at all. So as always, I hope this was helpful, and take care.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.